Welcome to the Dropping Gems con Muchos Colores podcast. I am your host, Arely Lagunas. This is an audio community where we own and share our stories as trailblazer moms, crafting a unique and meaningful work lifestyle, leading with passion, breaking barriers, and chasing bold dreams on our own terms. Celebrating our Latina motherhood voices to bring you genuine insights of the highs, the lows, and in-betweens of working moms from a first-gen Latina lens. We don't have to travel this journey alone. Let's get started.
Today's guest is Melissa Llarena. She is an author, imagination coach, consultant, speaker, contributor to ForbesWomen articles that have garnered 4 million views, and the host of Unimaginable Wellness, the podcast for entrepreneurs, founders, creators who are moms. Featured guests include GaryVee and Beth Comstock. Melissa holds a psychology degree from NYU, an MBA from the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth, and a Transformational Coaching Academy certificate. She's trained to become a meditation practitioner. Melissa lives in Austin, Texas with her husband and 3 sons. Visit her website, www.fertileideas.com, for a 5-day imagination to impact challenge, quiz, and for more goodies for moms. So check out today's episode. Personally, very thrilled to have this episode because I feel like we're all going to gain so much wisdom. And also because there is an upcoming event or an upcoming milestone for Melissa, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in our conversation today. But she is launching her book this month in October, so I'm really excited to have Melissa as an author and imagination coach to provide us more of her wisdom. So Melissa, welcome, and we can't wait to have a conversation and chat with you today.
Thank you, Ariely. I love speaking with other working moms who are doing their thing. So this is like such a treat. And anyone who's listening who is a working parent, I mean, I'm going to do my very, very best to share what I know so that this way you feel like you have all the resources you need to like dream bigger.
Yes. And yes, you are correct, right? It's always empowering to hear with other women, and that's why I'm excited to have you here, because I think that this is something that it's your expertise and part of the reason why you're launching this book. So tell us about your journey as a professional, as a mom, as a author. Tell us a little bit about what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so I pretty much carved my own path. It's funny. As a little girl, my favorite poet was Robert Frost, still is. And he has this beautiful poem about 2 roads kind of like leading you in different directions and choosing the one that is less traveled. And that has been the philosophy of my life and my experiences. So, relevant to having a corporate conventional career, I started my journey as a lot of listeners, most likely. So I worked in a corporate setting, and to kind of bring it home from like an HR perspective, I had a chance. I was about 17 years old when I first stepped foot in corporate America. So the job was at Chase Manhattan Bank, which is clearly not named that anymore, but let's just go with it. Mm-hmm. And I had a choice to make back then, which was, okay, either I stick to HR or I stick to marketing or some sort of function. And at that point, I was just so curious. And being such a curious early person in my career woman, I was like, okay, I want to try everything. Like, I want to know what investment management feels like. I want to know what HR feels like, the legal department. And so that was part of my journey that I carved out. And it's also one of the reasons why when I pursued business school, so I do have my MBA, I opted to do something yet again, very unconventional. So I did go and work for an ad agency after business school, which for anyone listening would know that usually that's not the path. Usually you work on the client side for like an organization, Procter & Gamble, GE, whatever it might be. And I wanted to be in the creative field. And, I don't know how creative you could get, although you can with Excel, but that was what I wanted to do, right? And so I was working in advertising. And I would say at that point, when I became a mom, that was yet again another point where I had to make a decision. And I think anyone that's a caregiver can really, really relate to this. There comes a point where you feel like you're really, really being called to do something maybe a little differently, or you just see life in a different perspective when someone other than yourself is almost, it feels like they're more important than yourself, right? So like as a mom, you have a baby and it's like they're helpless. And so at that point, I had to make a choice. Either I would stay in advertising and live out, what the MBA promised to fulfill, which was, a great income, stability, longevity, upward mobility, or I could carve my own path. And that's how I became a coach. So originally, because early on I had opted for different business units or functions, I decided to be a job search coach when I became a mom. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, if somebody would have told me that the choice I made when I was 17 would influence my career trajectory when I was already, how old was I? Like 30 at that point, 31. I would not have believed them. And so, however, I do get how a lot of us almost feel like we fall into our functional areas of expertise. For me, I will say it was a bit deliberate, but at the same time, the choice was that I wanted to have a choice and I wanted to carve my own path. And I attribute that to, like one poem that a teacher in like 7th grade exposed me to. And I actually mentioned her in the acknowledgments of my book. And I mean, it's like one of those things, you don't know how you affect someone through a conversation, a smile, or just a word of encouragement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really great. Thank you for sharing that, and how, everything transpired and, how everything's aligning, right? And I think it's so interesting because I had a similar experience where there was a 3rd grade teacher that made an impact till this day. And same thing with me, right? I actually did acknowledge her in my contributing author book because it impacted just those words that it was like words of encouragement, and also it provided that, wow, this is what I can do in the future. So I thought that was interesting how also a teacher made an impact to you, by sharing that with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say in the book there was another moment for one of my podcast guests. And so the book is a collection of a lot of the podcast guests that I've had on Unimaginable Wellness. And it's actually this gold medalist. So she won in the London Olympics in 2012. For her, speaking of small moments of greatness, for her, she grew up in poverty essentially. And so there was a point where she could not actually afford like peanut butter to eat during her university experience. And there was a friend of hers, a mom, basically a mom of a friend, who would give her like food. And like that mom had no idea that if she hadn't given this person, Bria Larson, leftovers, she would not have eaten. And you need to be physically fit and well nourished to make it to the Olympics. So it's really quite beautiful in the sense that although people that I feature in my book, Fertile Imagination, a guide for stretching every mom's superpower for maximum impact, although the people there are powerful influencers, big names, like you can be someone right now who's making a difference in your home or in your community and not even know it. And I think that's the hope. That's super cool.
We talk about your journey as an author, your journey as a professional, and you tapped a little bit into mom. How is that looking for you right now?
So as far as my motherhood working as a mom journey?
Yes, because I know you mentioned that, you wanted to make your own path. Um, what motivated that feeling to, to say, what, I'm not going to go with the conventional career path. I want to create my own path.
So it's interesting in the sense that usually when you enter a corporate environment, you've already grown up as an adult. So usually you are graduated from college, let's imagine, like that's one option. And you've lived some life. So you enter the world of work already with walls that are up, already with this sense that, okay, I have to play the role, play the part. But when I started corporate America, I was 17. I didn't have those walls. So what happened was that I would actually feel how unhappy people were around me. And it was interesting because I came from Astoria, Queens, and I was raised in a 650 square foot apartment, and my bedroom was half the living room. And I remember saying to myself, my goodness, like, look at all of these marketing executives. Like, they have the best manicures, and they live in Scarsdale, which is super, hoity toity, fancy schmancy. And they have houses that were unattached, which is something that is different than what I was accustomed to. And I was like, okay, and they're still not happy. Like, why do I feel like there's like a sadness or like a gray cloud all over? And this was across business units. It didn't matter if you were in investment management or if you were in marketing. And that was like the more like fancy side of the house because it was the time of like the .com era. But I noticed that. And so for me, because I also had the blessing of having a full scholarship at NYU as an undergrad, I didn't have that burden. I didn't have to pay that back. So for me, I was like, okay, like if I don't owe anyone anything, and it was really through my writing and a lot of hard work that I got that scholarship, but if I don't owe anyone anything, then guess what? My life is my life to live, and I'm going to carve out the path as I see fit in a way that adds value to the world and also adds value to me. And I think that's the difference, right? So a lot of individuals, they might feel like they're in that tight spot where you have those loans or you have to support your own family. And so you have these responsibilities that are already built in, sometimes even before you had like a choice to make, right? So it's like you were born into the situation that you were born into. And so you have to make choices that derive from, what you're willing to do versus what you're willing to sacrifice. So for me, because I saw that the beautiful waiting rooms in corporate America and the beautiful furniture and the wonderful trips and all of that stuff, business trips, was just how can I put it? It was just part of doing business. But then the reality, the emotional tone of the people was dark and heavy and sad. Yeah. Like I noticed that up front. And so I was not going to kid myself. Like I was like, okay, well, clearly all that glitters is not gold. So let me figure out my own path. And I didn't have that burden of debt.
Yes. And you know what? Yeah, you brought up a great point. You were 17 and I think that based on what you share, you're a very mature 17-year-old at the time, with kind of knowing what you wanted. And as much as I always feel that as much as we put a focus on what we want to do and we should know what we want to do, it's equally as important what we don't want to do, right? And the best way to do that is through exposure, right? So I also feel and I would even say I know I said equally, but I would even say there is a big value of knowing what you don't want. And in this case, you having that exposure to the corporate and getting that exposure at such a young age, that define how you wanted to proceed in the future, right? So I think that's really, I think that's a life, something so valuable, like a life lesson at such a young age. And you taking that information as a young adult, I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it was important to me just because as I said, I was raised by a single mom with a mental illness. And so she was not able to have the same options as me. And so for me, it would be almost disrespectful if I did not take advantage of all the opportunities that I was able to execute on in a way that was, with excellence and just, anything that she wasn't able to do essentially was like open and available to me, her daughter. And so for me, it just felt like, okay, well, how can I play my cards the best possible way? Right. And so for me, in terms of being mature at 17, for a lot of people that, like you might be listening right now, for example, and you might think to yourself, yeah, I matured very early. And it's usually because of those early life circumstances, right, that we're shaped, right? Especially like the age of 0 to 7 and how your brain changes and all of that. And I know that right now we're living in a moment where a lot of that is brought up as a reason why, you want a certain form of treatment, for lack of a better phrase. But what I wanted to do, and my intention behind Fertile Imagination, my book, is to see the silver lining in having to grow up quickly and use my imagination to get out of sticky situations with my mom. So I had a choice up front, and I always have a choice to approach my past in a way that is uplifting to me in my present moment or debilitating to me in my present moment. And so rather than say, woe is me, and it was such a tough life experience, I could have written that book, but I didn't even want to write a book like that because I wanted to see like what good came of having to navigate life as a little girl with essentially responsibilities of an adult, some of which some adults don't even take because they might not have the same courage, as a kid, which is ironic, but I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that.
Yes, yeah, thank you for sharing that. Before we dive fully into your book, I did want to make a comment. You're absolutely correct. A lot of the circumstances in someone's life journey can not prepare you, but make that only option of maturing and growing up fast. I can see that with a lot of our immigrant parents, right? Like even for me myself, my parents became parents at a very young age, and now that I reflect back on some other decisions and some other things that transpire, I go back to that same moment of, what, they became parents when they were 16 and 17, and I mean, becoming a parent, it's just a big responsibility. So I just wanted to share that, but I also appreciate you sharing a little bit more about some of the challenges you had, and also hearing about, that growth mindset, because you're completely right. You go through life and there are hardships and challenges, but what a better way to discuss, more on, okay, I went through that, but now I'm going to see it in a different perspective that can maybe help others, right? So with that, I want to ask you if you can tell us more about your latest book, and provide us more insight of what inspired you to write it. I know we heard a little bit more about what you wanted to, the message or your mission, but if you can tell us more about your latest book and the entire inspiration behind it.
So this book came at a time when my family and I were living in Australia. We were living in Australia for 3.5 years, and same thinking. It wasn't that we had to live in Australia. We certainly didn't know anyone in Australia. We had just bought a house, just bought a car in Connecticut in the United States, and we wanted to experience life in a different way. Period. Like there wasn't much more behind that. And so my husband and I then made a choice, and I talk about this in the book, to relocate our whole family to Australia. And that was when the wildfires happened, and then the pandemic happened shortly thereafter. And during that time of the pandemic, I had a couple of choices to make, which was, okay, keep my job search coaching practice open. And what that meant was taking in, prospective client calls. So like sales conversations, oftentimes at really off hours of the day, because I was in Australia and my clients were in New York, or the US in general, and also Europe. But ultimately, it just felt so hard to keep my job search coaching practice open, especially when people in the United States in particular were feeling so like depressed and anxious, clearly, as a lot of us were during the pandemic. And it didn't feel good to me, to my emotional well-being. And at the time, the schools closed in Australia, and there was a lockdown of about 106 days. And I counted, it was 106 days. And I have 3 little boys. Mm-hmm. So I have identical twins who right now are 9 years old, and I have a 12-year-old. So 3 boys living in Sydney, Australia, schools all closed, mommy with like a job search coaching business and a podcast. What do I do? Well, what I wanted to do, I had just turned 40 when I was in Australia during the pandemic, and I wanted to write a book. Like I just wanted to write a book. There wasn't much more that went into that, except the fact that I knew every time I would write, like I would leave an imprint on other people's lives. And I also knew that as a writer, there's something about writing that it's almost like a transcendent experience for me. So that's part of why I had gotten the full scholarship at NYU, because of my writing. And then when I went for my MBA at Dartmouth, again, I got a full scholarship there because of my writing. So I thought to myself, a really good use of my time, so that I'm not talking to clients at 5 a.m. on a Saturday morning in Australia, would be to sit down and write a book. Like, this is the book that's taken 2 years to put together. And it was during that pandemic moment because, again, I wanted to homeschool my kids. We had no choice, right? And I wanted to do something that would utilize like my skills and talents. And I wanted to pivot. So a lot of individuals, right, during this moment of the pandemic, we thought to ourselves, okay, this work, the work that we do, our careers that we're in, like maybe they're not the best place for our talents and skills. Maybe we don't feel appreciated. Like a lot of us questioned our careers during the pandemic. And so me too. So that's why I wrote my book, and I had to decide to whom I would write the book, like who was my target audience. And it's for moms. And that was such a hard choice. I had already been a mom for 12 years. So you would think it's like, oh, you've been a mom. But I wasn't having this conversation with moms. I was coaching marketing executives, talking marketing speak, doing resume stuff, interviewing them. I wasn't saying, hey, go after your dreams. I wasn't telling them, make sure that you have a personal fan, or make sure that you can, ask for help or learn how to trust yourself. And those are the things that I have in my book. So my book is really like, and for anyone that's familiar with this other book, then you'll get it. So there's this book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And this particular book is more like a course. It's like a 12-week course, and you're really rediscovering your creativity. Well, my book is like The Artist's Way for mom entrepreneurs. So you have here 3 sections of this book. The first one is about waking up your imagination. So what I learned about myself is that my imagination was almost like in a coma. And it happens to us because as working parents, as moms, we barely sleep, right? And so for your imagination to feel like it's, appropriate to come out and play, it needs to know that their playmate is going to have some energy to play back. Mm-hmm. So your imagination is asleep. So that's the first section of the book. The second section is about playing with your imagination. And what I love about that section is that I decided to feature individuals who were known for their imagination. So not everybody in the book is a mom, because I think we can all use our ability to be creative to find the lessons that apply to us. And I think as moms, we could tailor them to suit our own family situations and priorities. So in the play with your imagination section, I include their really beautiful people. For example, Beth Comstock. She was the CMO of GE. We're talking talking about a powerful player with, I assume, P&L responsibilities, certainly a people leader who made an impact in a manufacturing organization, and she played with her imagination. And what did that look like? She would go to like a Korean pop band concert to see, well, why were people so loyal and such fanatics, right? And then she would take those insights back to GE, apply them to whatever situation was necessary, and GE would, increase shareholder value as one does. And so that's playing, the art of playing. And I offer different examples, not just, a world leader and like a marketing icon, but even a children's book illustrator as well. So that's the second part, play with your imagination, because if you don't use it, you lose it, right? So there's atrophy, just like muscles. If you're not working out, your muscles are just going to go, not have much power to them. And then the third part is about stretching your imagination. And so for me, it's really about figuring out how to duplicate ourselves. So as moms, oftentimes we're like, I wish I could duplicate myself. I wish I had 8 arms. I wish. Well, the answer, the productivity hack that everyone asks me about is so simple, but no one wants to do it for different reasons, which is ask for help, right? And asking for help does not necessarily mean you're like paying for childcare. It could be asking a friend who has a brother who works at an organization where you want to work. It could be that, that's like free. So there's these 3 concepts as it relates to imagination. And I want to be sure that as a reader, you choose your own adventure. Like you pick the chapter that you feel most called to learn from. So whether you want to be a better decision maker and you're a mom, or you want to rewrite your script, like how you play the role of a mom, because if you're like, if you had parents that came from a different country, there's certain cultural nuances that have to do with how you should be a mom and the things that you shouldn't do. Maybe you want to act differently, right? And so this book invites a mom to really reflect on her role, but not just her role, also on her relationship with other people. So right now you see moms that they're cheering for their kids. Like they'll go to the soccer match and they're cheering and they're screaming and they're losing their voice because they're so happy for their son, their daughter. But what about a scenario where you, the mom, is actually in the field playing the game and you have your kids, your family, your partner cheering you on? It's almost like a flip of the switch, right? Mm-hmm. And I think from that position, our kids, because you could tell them everything you want to tell them, but they will do what they see you do. And on top of that, when it comes to resilience, I know right now, a lot of kids, you hear that they're not as resilient, right? That they're not as capable of handling big challenges and tough conversations. This is another way to teach a kid resiliency. It's by you, the mom, experiencing a moment and then getting back up, and your kid seeing, wait, mommy got back up. Oh, that's how you get back up? Oh, maybe you cry before you get back up because it hurts, but then you get back up and then you press forth. So I think there's a lot to be learned from the book. It's a book that I would see more as like a continuous conversation. It's not a book that you just read in one sitting. It's a book that you would take out, your notebook, and you would answer the questions after each chapter and really think through how you want to live out your life moving forward.
Thank you for that information. I really, honestly, I can't wait to read it. And one of the reasons why, I love this collaboration and having this conversation with you is because, one, I love the fact that you wrote this book in mind of the moms, right? Like you want this book to be a tool for moms and that they can use it, like you said, and choose the chapter that is best calling them and apply it. So I love that aspect, how you're dedicating space for moms. I personally, from my experience, I feel that moms need more support. And this is one way of getting that, right? By having authors like you who are creating this space for moms. So I love that because it also correlates with my mission and why I started the podcast in 2021. So this month will be my 2nd-year anniversary. And I started the podcast still within the whole COVID era, right? And I have a similar mission as well. I wanted to make sure that this was holding space for mothers so that they can feel empowered, and that also that our voices are being heard. Because for me, right, listening to other mothers, listening to seeing the impact of other working moms, it only just encourages me to keep pushing forward, because there's always going to be challenging times. So thank you for creating that space for moms and being able to have a book that they can go back, right? They can go back after reading it and applying that and reflecting on that information that is there. Is there anything that made it challenging during the writing process while you were writing this book, and how did you overcome that challenge?
Yeah, so I would say that writing for me, as far as like the blank page, is never an issue. So for me, I tend to like just pour everything onto the page, and I cannot say that it's like intelligible and clear, but I pour stuff on the page. So my particular writing challenge would be knowing like how to filter and making sure that I am grabbing a mom's attention and keeping her attention using like one thread. So it's really specific. So anyone that's a writer would really understand this probably a little more clearly, but let me make it broad. So let's imagine that you have to write an answer to an essay for school, or you're writing like a white paper for work, whatever the case might be. Like you have to really, really understand what is the question that you're trying to answer when you are, embarking on either journey. And sometimes, because for me, I'm a divergent thinker, sometimes I might go to the left, I might go to the right, I might go upside down when it comes to that topic. So for me, what I did was I tried on my own at first. What does that mean? So I wrote, I would say, 2 books before this book in order to get to this book. So during the pandemic, I was like, okay, let me do what people say. And they call it be a pansy, which means that you're just writing and you're not doing like a skeleton. You're just writing. It's like, okay, I'm spending 1 hour today and I'm writing and I'm writing and I'm writing. Well, I had about 70,000 words at that point, right, when I was approaching it from that perspective. But it was just really hard to envision that this would be a clearly written book. So then I went to the next phase. The next phase was, okay, I'm really great at asking questions. So let me come up with a skeleton that is going to comprise of questions. So that was a really, really good attempt because it kept me on task. So I just, the first, like the introduction, right? So the question I asked myself as an example would be, why should you, busy mom that doesn't even have time to sleep, read my book? Right? Let's just imagine. So I gave myself that question and then I would answer it in a paragraph and so on and so forth. So I did that. Again, another 70,000 words. But at the end of the day, it was really hard for me to do this by myself because I could not edit where I was repeating myself. Like it's really hard to have a huge document and then like massage it. It's a lot easier if it's just 1,000 words. So this is where my intuition kicks in. And it's also in my book. So in my book, I actually invited a podcast guest. So there's all podcast guests in my book. And she's a Stanford trained decision engineer. Her name is Michelle Florendo. And she basically gave me some insights on how to make decisions. And one of them is using your gut. There's other ways to make decisions and your instincts. So, and your intuition, right? So that year I was like, okay, I'm going to do this in the way that I've never done anything before. I'm going to be guided. I'm going to find a way to just follow my intuition. So one day I was walking into a bookstore in Australia and I saw a really nice book and I was like, that book is really cool. So I interviewed the author of this book, and in her book, because I noticed that her writing was really crisp, in her book, I noticed my editor, Amanda. Amanda lives in Tasmania. I was in Australia, and I asked Amanda if she could help me as a developmental editor. So what that meant was I would write, again, blank page is not my issue. So I would write like 2,500 words in one sitting. Maybe it took about 3 hours or so. Then I would email it to her. And then she would be like, Melissa, where are you going with this? Or she would be like, okay, this is too much. Cut, 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 cut. And then she would send it back to me. And we went back and forth, kind of like, ping pong for some months doing that. The challenge also was we were in the pandemic. So a lot of writers, they fantasize about, I was at a beautiful cafe drinking coffee, blah, 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 and writing. Yeah. Well, the cafes were closed during the COVID era in Australia. So there would be times that it'd be 5 a.m., let's say. And I'm a mom of 3. So that's the other reason why 5 a.m. was my writing time. So I would sit down at my kitchen table, pray that nobody would wake up because I could see the doors of the twins and my eldest right in front of me. And I would just get to writing, or I would be at the foot of my bed, really bad for lower back issues, but I would be at the foot of my bed on my knees typing, right? And I had to really motivate myself. I really did, because if I had been at a beautiful cafe, sometimes I was, because the writing took quite some time, and like after the pandemic, but I had to really motivate myself. So the way that I motivated myself was through the use of my imagination. So in my book, in the preface, I actually share a vision that I had, and that was finally like a reemergence of my own imagination. And the vision was that my book would be on the shelves of the great library in Alexandria in Egypt. Like, that's the vision that I had. And for me, I was like, okay, no matter what, I'm just going to finish this thing and I'm going to book us to Egypt, and I'm going to do it, even if it's like, not the right way of getting your book on a shelf, but just like dropping it off of the shelf. And I needed that vision to stay very connected to A, my imagination, and then B, to completing this project. And so I haven't booked my ticket yet, but it's in the works, and I'm a woman of my word. So I will be in Egypt and I will take pictures and I'll show everyone with my book in the shelf.
Awesome. That is definitely an awesome goal, and I know you will accomplish it. So I definitely do post pictures. Is also on my bucket list to do at some point of my lifetime. But as I was hearing you, I was also like smiling because, it reminded me how adaptable we can be due to circumstances, right? With the pandemic, and how, you weren't able to really use like a cafe where you can relax your mind, but you still did it, whether it was at home, at 5 a.m., how adaptable adaptable, and being able to pivot, right? So that you can finish that writing goal, or, the book. So I was smiling about that because, I feel like as moms, we have, like, this is something I personally like always think about, like, never underestimate the power of a mom, because when we say we want to accomplish something, I mean, we go through anything to get it done, obviously with wellness in mind, right? So I thought that was interesting. And you actually answered one of the questions I had for you, right? Was any memorable or significant moment from your writing journey about this book? And now I know about it. Is this the plan for you to have your book and being able to be in Egypt? I mean, that is that's an awesome goal, and I'm glad that it became something memorable from your writing journey.
Yeah, for sure.
you had mentioned your book explores transferable skills, and I love this topic because this is something that I also very familiar with, as a career coach, and also HR practitioner. This is something that I always have in the mind of the clients I work with. So, what drew you to this subject, and what message or insight do you hope readers will take away from this particular section in your book?
I would say that right now, with the way that the world of work has changed, and with AI and with the operationalizing of a lot of things, including even creative thinking and innovation, we need to have some sort of edge. And for me, I think this idea of being a generalist is actually way cooler than being a specialist, in my personal opinion. Because here's what happens oftentimes, or we just saw it with the pandemic. It's like, well, okay, so let's say you're not able to do your very specific role. Then what? It's almost like you're up a creek. So why not really hone in on as many skills as possible, so that this way you have options, and so that this way you could also mix and match them, so that you can come up with innovative solutions to business challenges that have been around forever and have not been resolved, because a lot of times it's not as profitable, if I'm being honest, to solve some problems. So the reason why I decided to land on that topic, and it's actually featured really, really obviously in a chapter where I interviewed Phaedra Knight. So Phaedra is a Rugby Hall of Famer. And I mean, she's done stuff with like, Halle Berry. I mean, she's been on MTV. So she's like done a lot of things in sports and outside sports. She's been like an NBC commentator as well. And the reason why I featured her was because I thought it was amazing that here's this African American woman, Hall of Famer, who is, almost 50 and is now doing, Muay Thai tournaments, so she's in the octagon still killing it. And when I spoke with her, she was like in the woods of Georgia preparing for her MMA tournament during the pandemic. This was the early days. And for me, someone like that is evidence that age does not matter, because ultimately, if you decide that you want to be like, think about Elon Musk's mom, like Mayi, she's like a supermodel right now. Okay. I think she's in her 70s or 80s. So depending on how you want to play out your life experience, the more skills that you have and the more guts you have in order to say that you can use those skills, the more options you're going to have, and the greater longevity in a different perspective too. Like Phaedra Knight, because she was, a coach, because she was in the field, because she did like bobsledding, as well, she's able to make the full use of her musculature in any sports. She's able to have a conversation with someone and say, you know what? This is how you might want to benefit from a totally different, technique in a totally different mixed martial arts, sort of field. And so I see that as being very valuable to a mom. Here's why. Let's imagine you have a child that has different abilities and they have to see a flurry of experts. You know who's the generalist in that situation? It's a mom. The mom gets to have the conversation with like the speech pathologist. The mom gets to have the conversation with, someone like the psychologist that works on behavior, the neurologist that works on, the neurological side of things. And you have all these engaging conversations that have to make sense for the caring of your one child. And that's on a personal level, right? When it comes to a career, it's the same idea. If you have a bird's eye view to an organization, to an industry, to an ecosystem, you can figure out where there's value that is not totally unpacked. And you can be the person to bring that to the attention of a decision maker, unless you are the decision maker yourself. And I want to give moms an opportunity to not discount the skills and experiences they have in their home as, I just do it because I'm a mom. Any mom would do it. No. like not everybody can have an intelligible conversation with a neurologist about a child that's facing certain challenges. Not everybody is able to handle the behavior concerns of your child. Like that's special, that's valuable, and that too is transferable in the workplace. Because don't tell me no one here has ever seen or not seen a boss with a temper tantrum, right? Same skill, maybe different techniques and tools, but there's so much transferability. And I think for anyone that's been outside of the work world for a year or two, you lose sight that, wait a minute, even as a mom, outside of a paycheck, what I'm doing is incredibly of value. And I think it should be part of interviewing conversations as well. And as the job candidate, if you're a mom, you need to be the one to bring voice to these things.
There's a lot of research that shows that moms could be the best leaders out there in the work environment, right? And there's so many transferable skills, to your point, that you can transfer as a working mom, and also someone who's been a stay-at-home mom, right? Anything from like time management to empathy, compassion, like to what you were saying, communication skills, problem solving. I mean, the list goes on, right? And these are things, and me being had been on both sides of the spectrum, being the hiring manager, being a candidate, having experience in HR. I can tell you that when it comes to having two candidates that are very close in skill set, at the end of the day, they go to the core skills, which I like to call them core skills. I don't like to call them soft skills, but they're the core skills, effective communication, team building, all these things that are not easy to teach, right? Like whenever there is a leader, right, you can teach certain skills like technical skills, but those core skills are really hard to teach. I love that you incorporated that aspect into the chapter, because I think that's going to be very helpful for all the mom readers out there. And it's something that I look forward to reading and, applying more of that. So thank you for sharing that, that particular section of your book.
You're welcome.
I know we talked a little bit about some of the ritual, some of the unique ways of having that typical writing day. Is there anything else you wanted to share? I know you said it was a little bit of, you had to have more creativity as far as like finding that atmosphere to get you going with your writing flow. But aside from your kid's bedroom, I know you said you also did get an opportunity to go to like maybe one cafe, but any other rituals that you thought were helpful for you to write your book?
Yeah, I think it's funny because I would like to say, having incense, candles, and an ergonomic chair would have been part of the ideal setting. Yeah. But here's the truth. This is going to be so sobering for anyone that really, really takes this in. Here's the truth. The only goals that I have achieved in my life, I have achieved in the least ideal situations. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? My goal was to write this book. If I didn't write when I didn't feel like writing, this book would not have gotten done. If I decided to not write when I was leading a global relocation, because we returned from Australia to Austin, Texas, I'm not even from Austin, Texas. So it was like from another part of the world to a new part of the world because I'm a New Yorker. If I decided to skip writing when we're going through that global relocation, I would not have finished my book. The same exact approach is with regards to any goal. Like, you are not going to achieve your goal if you're looking for the perfect situation in which to execute on what it takes to achieve that goal. If you're looking for a bright sunny day, no rain, 75 degrees in order to run, you are not going to run. like, you know what I mean? It's so seldom that it'll happen. So for me, the only routine that matters is progress. and no excuses. And I think as moms, a lot of times we might say that our kids are our excuses, but I want to put a bright light on that. I really, really do, because this is something that our kids, when they're our age later on, can also use as an excuse for not going after their goals. And I need us all to be so honest with ourselves, because the truth is, were you watching the Netflix supermodel series the other day? You know what I mean? Like, were you avoiding writing a page for your book and, opting to clean up the garage instead because that was easier to see the finish line too, right? So rather than think about the routine from a writing perspective or the routine from a workout perspective, it's really a matter of saying, you know what, all excuses are off the table. I need to do what I can do today, even if I'm sick. And I know this doesn't go well with the anti-hustle culture, but I'm just being really honest. Even if I don't feel like writing, even if my family members need me, because you know what? Now you can use your cell phone and you could record your voice, which is what I had to do during my writing journey. I actually audio recorded my acknowledgements page because that was when my house, there was like a freeze in Austin, Texas, and we had to go to a hotel because there was no power for days. So I was in a Barnes and Noble parking lot, audio recording my acknowledgements, because that is what you do when you want to achieve a goal. And that's part of what I also wrote in the book in one of the chapters. It's about being single-minded and doing whatever it takes and owning your process, not letting anyone else own your process towards goal achievement. Same thing with all those writing exercises I had to do to get the scholarships. If I let myself be bamboozled by my mom's mental illness, I would not have done what I have done. So it's really about saying to yourself, I can't afford to make an excuse. I have to do what I can do. And as a mom, we are brilliant when it comes to Googling things, figuring out logistics, handling, childcare that falls apart. We're good at that. Okay. And we need to use the same skills, transferable skills, towards the achievement of our own greatness and our own goals.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. That's very powerful. And, what I hear here is, the ability to identify, focus, keep that focus on your goal and seize those opportunities, because there is always going to be something, it's never going to be smooth sailing, right?
No.
Never is going to be that way. And I know that this book will help, with tools, because essentially that's what you need. You need the tools. And then what I thought was great about your book is that it's another tool for mothers to use to accomplish, like you said, their greatness, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, and if anybody wants to actually see what, using your imagination looks like, so putting it into action in their own lives, I do have a free 5-day challenge for moms on my website, fertileideas.com. And you're able to actually co-ideate a business idea with your child. Like for me, that's the epitome of playing with your imagination, like doing it with your child, erasing the mom guilt and coming up with something that's fun and doing it together. So I would invite anybody that listens to head over to fertileideas.com for sure. Or even, follow me on Instagram if you have any questions about this, because the book is coming out October 31. It's going to be a 1-day sale for 99 cents, the Kindle edition, where the full price is $6.99. And I would love, love, love to help anyone that has a dream on their heart and see it through.
Perfect. And that leads me to thanking you for having the time and sharing with us your insights, your expertise, and making this conversation very engaging. I know that it's going to have a significant impact on our motherhood community. And I want to thank you, again, for the time to be our guest at our Dropping Gems con Muchos Colores. And any other promotional material or links you'd like to share with our audience, please feel free to share so that they can follow you on Instagram, maybe your Instagram handle or your website.
Yeah, so it's at Melissa Llarena. So Melissa Llarena. So on Instagram, that's where I'm at. And then in terms of the website, fertileideas.com, that's where you can get a free chapter also to the book. So I actually have the physical book. It's my proof. I was like, oh my goodness, I got it. It's in my hands. And yeah, it has a lot of colores. So it aligns with the podcast.
Awesome. Well, I will make time to read this for sure. And, please follow Melissa for any future upcoming projects and, of course, her book launch. So thank you, Melissa.
Thanks for listening to the
Thank
Dropping Gems
you.
con
Have an
Muchos
awesome
Colores
one.
podcast.
Thank you.
We have a new episode every month. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to leave a review and subscribe so you don't miss a beat. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.